In 1950, the average American salary was about $3,200 a year, and that was enough to buy a house, raise a family, and still take a vacation. Imagine that today. Back then, a gallon of gas cost 29 cents. $5 filled your tank, and you still had enough left over for a burger and a Coke. The 1950s weren't just a different time. They were a different rhythm. Slower, smaller, and somehow bigger all at once. Let's take a step back into the golden decade and see what life was really like. Most American families in the 1950s lived modestly by today's standards, but somehow it felt rich. A typical home had one car in the driveway, one bathroom down the hall, and one television glowing in the living room, and that was enough. Kids didn't just fight over the television dial. They hovered like hawks, waiting for their turn to twist that heavy knob. No remotes, no streaming, just 3 or 4 channels. And if the antenna on the roof wasn't lined up right, Dad would send someone onto the garage with a wrench, while the rest of the family shouted instructions from inside. Sunday dinner wasn't up for debate. It was the heart of the week. Families gathered around big wooden tables, grandparents, cousins, neighbors who dropped by. The meal was simple but filling. Roast beef, mashed potatoes, green beans snapped by hand, and that infamous Jell-O mold that looked better than it tasted. No one liked it, but everyone took a spoonful out of politeness. What mattered wasn't the food, but the ritual. Stories were told, prayers were said, and children learned that family time was non-negotiable. Life revolved around chores, and those chores were exercise. Mowing the lawn meant pushing a heavy reel mower with no engine. Laundry was clipped to clotheslines that stretched across the backyard, flapping in the wind like flags of everyday life. Kids fetched water from the garden hose, raked leaves in autumn, shoveled snow in winter, and hauled wood when the stove needed it. Nobody called it fitness, but it built muscles just the same. And when Grandpa rolled up his trousers to cool off, you realized he had calves stronger than most athletes today. School lunches carried the same sturdy character. On the tray, a scoop of meatloaf, a mound of peas, mashed potatoes, a square of cornbread, and a tiny carton of whole milk. No soda, no pizza slices, no trading for candy bars. And complaining wasn't wise. The lunch lady was often a farm wife who looked like she'd carried more hay bales than you could count. Trust was the quiet backbone of daily life. Families gave spare house keys to neighbors before heading out of town. No alarms, no cameras, no motion sensors, just confidence that the Johnsons next door would feed the cat, water the garden, and maybe even leave a pie cooling on the counter for when you got back. Children played stickball in the street until the streetlights flicked on, and parents didn't worry much because they knew every face on the block. Daily life in the 1950s wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. It was built on small routines, familiar rhythms, and a sense that even the simplest things, a hot meal, a neighbor's wave, the smell of laundry drying in the sun, were enough to carry a family through. If daily life in the 1950s was steady and practical, entertainment was where America let loose. Nothing defined the decade more than music, and no one defined music more than Elvis Presley. In 1954, when he recorded That's All Right, teenagers lost their minds. His voice was raw, his moves scandalized parents, and his hips sent preachers into sermons. But for kids with record players in their bedrooms, Elvis wasn't just a singer. He was proof that the world could be shaken up by rhythm and rebellion. Alongside him came Chuck Berry, Little Richard, and Buddy Holly, each pushing rock and roll louder, faster, and wilder than anything that came before. Television was still young, but already powerful. I Love Lucy had families laughing together in their living rooms, while American Bandstand showed clean-cut teens dancing in saddle shoes and poodle skirts. Dick Clark didn't just host a show, he became the face of a generation. And when someone in the neighborhood got a new color television, it wasn't just a purchase, it was a social event. Half the block crowded into one living room to watch the world turn from black and white into shades of blue and red. Movies thrived too, but not always inside theaters. Drive-in cinemas were at their peak. You'd pull up your car, hang a metal speaker on the window, and watch a double feature under the stars. The sound was scratchy, the popcorn often burnt, but none of that mattered. Couples held hands in the back seat. Kids wore pajamas and piled into the station wagon, and for a few hours, the whole family lived in a world of flickering light. Toys also captured the spirit of the times. In 1952, Mr. Potato Head made history as the first toy advertised on television. At first, you had to supply your own potato, sticking plastic noses and goofy eyes into a real spud. Parents laughed, kids loved it, and soon enough, the plastic version arrived. By 1958, another craze hit: the hula hoop. 25 million hoops sold in just 4 months. Kids spun themselves dizzy in driveways, while parents secretly tried at night and usually ended up with sore backs and bigger smiles. No kid in the 1950s grew up without dreaming of owning a radio flyer wagon. It wasn't just a toy. It was transportation for everything: your little brother, your dog, your rock collection. On rainy days, it flipped into a pirate ship, a race car, or a fortress. Imagination was the only upgrade needed. Food found its way into pop culture too. The invention of the television dinner in 1953 was a revolution. For 98 cents, you got turkey, peas, and dessert, all in a foil tray. Families thought it was futuristic, not processed. Eating in front of the television felt like a treat, not a bad habit. And when Waffle House opened in 1955, it offered something brand new. A place open 24/7, where truckers, teens, and early risers all rubbed shoulders over coffee and waffles. Entertainment in the 1950s wasn't about perfection, it was about discovery. Whether it was a new sound on the radio, a hoop spinning in the backyard, or a movie projected against the night sky, everything felt fresh. And every memory came wrapped in a sense of wonder that still lingers today. If the music and movies of the 1950s gave America its soundtrack, then community life gave it its heartbeat. Back then, neighborhoods weren't just places where people lived side by side. They were living, breathing families of their own. Most folks didn't lock their doors. It wasn't because crime didn't exist, but because trust was stronger than fear. If your family left town, you handed your house key to the Johnsons next door. They'd feed your cat, water your plants, and maybe even leave a pie on your counter for when you came back. Children played stickball or hopscotch in the street until the streetlights flicked on, and parents knew that if anything went wrong, every neighbor on the block would look out for them. The local barber shop was more than a place to get a haircut. It was the town's unofficial news station. Men sat in red leather chairs, swapping stories while the buzz of clippers hummed in the background. The barber knew everybody's name, their kids, and their secrets, though he only shared the good ones. Across the street, the soda fountain was just as lively. Red stools spun endlessly. Teenagers sipped cherry cokes, and waitresses yelled names like they'd known you forever because they probably had. Sundays brought the community together in ways hard to imagine today. Church wasn't optional. It was the anchor of the week. Families dressed in their best, men in suits and hats, women in gloves and pearls, children squirming in polished shoes. Afterward, everyone shook hands on the church steps before heading home to roast chicken or pot roast. For many, faith wasn't just religion, it was routine, the glue that held the week in place. Community also meant family dinners that spilled beyond your own four walls. Relatives, neighbors, even the wandering cousin no one could keep track of always seemed to show up at the table. The kitchen table wasn't just for eating. It was where arguments were hashed out, homework was done, and advice was given whether you asked for it or not. Even schools reflected that same spirit. Kids respected, or at least feared, their teachers. You stood up when called on, answered with "yes, ma'am," and didn't dare talk back unless you wanted your ears boxed and a note sent home. Discipline wasn't debated, it was expected. And behind it all was a belief that education wasn't just about books, but about raising kids to be good citizens. And when neighbors had a baby, everyone rallied. Casseroles appeared at the doorstep, hand-me-down cribs were passed along, and the proud father handed out cigars. There were no baby registries or Amazon wish lists, just people helping people. Because that's what you did. Trust, connection, and togetherness weren't slogans in the 1950s, they were the fabric of daily life. And though times have changed, many still remember that feeling of knowing your neighbors had your back, no matter what. While daily routines and neighborhood trust gave the 1950s its heart, progress and history gave it its drama. The decade was a balancing act on one side, excitement about the future. On the other, fear about what that future might hold. In 1953, doctors James Watson and Francis Crick announced they had uncovered the double helix structure of DNA. To the average American, it was just a strange story in the newspaper. But behind the headlines, it was the discovery that would reshape medicine, science, and even criminal investigations for decades to come. Just 5 years later, in 1958, another quiet invention slipped into the world: the microchip. At the time, no one outside a laboratory cared much, but it laid the foundation for every computer, phone, and gadget we take for granted today. Science wasn't only in labs, it was in hospitals, too. In 1953, surgeons performed the first successful open-heart surgery using a heart-lung machine. The idea of stopping the heart, repairing it, and starting it again sounded like science fiction, but it worked, and it gave doctors courage to attempt the impossible. Meanwhile, the shadow of polio haunted every summer. Pools were closed, parents were fearful, and children were kept indoors. Then, in 1955, Jonas Salk's vaccine arrived. For the first time in years, America let out a collective sigh of relief. Technology rolled into everyday life through more practical inventions. Color televisions appeared in 1954, carrying a price tag of around $1,000, close to $10,000 today. Most families couldn't afford one, so they stuck with black and white. But when one neighbor splurged, half the block crowded into their living room to watch the world turn from gray into living color. Kitchen appliances gleamed with chrome, promising a modern life: waffle irons, toasters, and blenders that looked like props from a science fiction movie. And if something broke, Dad didn't toss it. He grabbed his toolbox and fixed it. On the highways, change came in 1956 when President Dwight D. Eisenhower signed the Federal Aid Highway Act, launching the interstate system. Before that, road trips were messy and unpredictable. Maps folded awkwardly across dashboards, spare tires rattled in the trunk, and if you broke down in the middle of nowhere, you hoped someone friendly passed by. The interstates promised a new America: faster, safer, and more connected. But the world beyond America's borders wasn't always so bright. From 1950 to 1953, the Korean War raged on. More than 1.7 million Americans served, and thousands never came home. For many families, it was a quiet wound, rarely spoken of, but deeply felt. Veterans often returned to small towns and slipped back into ordinary life without fanfare, carrying memories too heavy to share. The decade's greatest shock came not from Earth, but from space. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first man-made satellite. It was only the size of a beach ball, but it terrified America. Suddenly, the Cold War wasn't just about politics, it was about the sky above. The space race was on, and American kids started hearing a new word in classrooms: science. Progress in then 1950 was dazzling and frightening all at once. It promised better health, faster travel, brighter entertainment, and new frontiers, but it also whispered of nuclear power, foreign threats, and a future no one could quite predict. The 1950s taught America that change was unstoppable, and that the world would never be the same again. The 1950s weren't perfect. There were wars, worries, and challenges that families quietly shouldered. But ask anyone who lived through it, and they'll tell you it was a time that felt steady, familiar, and full of promise. Doors were unlocked, neighbors were trusted, and Sunday dinner was sacred. Children played until the streetlights came on, parents stretched paychecks further than we can imagine today, and communities leaned on each other in ways we rarely see anymore. Life was simpler, not because nothing happened, but because people believed the simple things were enough. A glass bottle of Coca-Cola, a new song on the jukebox, a laugh shared over the barber's chair. Those small moments built a world that still glows warm in memory. So maybe the real magic of the 1950s isn't just in the inventions, the highways, or even the rock and roll. It's in the feeling that life could be ordinary and still extraordinary at the very same time. And now the question is for you. What do you miss most from the golden 50 seconds, the drive-in movies, the 5-cent Coke, or just the neighbors who always had your back?